The city glittered below like a million scattered diamonds, but Ethan Hale saw none of its beauty. From the 72nd floor of his glass tower, New York looked small, silent, almost fragile. The way life had seemed ever since the accident. He stood by the window with a glass of untouched scotch in his hand, the lights reflecting off his sharp suit and hollow eyes. He was 38, handsome in a distant way, his expression carved from stone. People called him a genius, a visionary, a man who'd built an empire out of nothing. But inside, he felt like a ghost haunting his own success. Once, he had wanted a family. He used to imagine little feet running across marble floors, laughter echoing through the hallways. But that dream had ended on a rainy night 3 years ago when a truck swerved into his car on Fifth Avenue. The crash shattered bones, tore muscles, and took away the one thing he couldn't replace, his ability to be a father. The doctors called it irreversible. His fiancée, Claire, had called it unfortunate. 2 months later, she walked away, leaving behind a ring and a note that read, "I can't live a half-life." Since then, Ethan lived by numbers and deals. Feelings were for people who could afford them. His penthouse was filled with priceless art and automated silence, machines that obeyed but never spoke, walls that gleamed but never comforted. His assistants rotated weekly, unable to stand the pressure of his cold perfection. So when his estate manager told him about a new applicant for the housekeeper position, he barely listened. Until she walked in, Maria Delgado entered the room with quiet steps, her hands folded politely in front of her. She wore a simple gray dress and carried an air of humility that didn't fit in the mirrored luxury of Ethan's world. Her dark eyes met his, steady, calm, but carrying something that made him pause. It wasn't fears, it was understanding. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, her accent smooth but clear. "Thank you for seeing me." Her voice didn't tremble like most people's did in front of him. Ethan nodded, gesturing toward the seat across from his desk. "You've worked in private homes before?" "Yes, sir," she said, her fingers lightly touching the folder in her lap. "Mostly for families, sometimes for people who forget what family feels like." He looked up, surprised by the quiet honesty of her words. "And which am I?" "I don't know yet," she said simply. "But your house feels lonely." Ethan wasn't used to people speaking to him that way. His instinct was to shut down, to end the interview, to remind her that she was here for a job, not to psychoanalyze her employer. But something in her tone disarmed him. She wasn't pitying him, she was seeing him, and that was far more dangerous. As the interview went on, he found himself asking questions he didn't need to ask, about her life, her family, the reason she came to New York. She told him she'd come from a small town near Guadalajara after her husband died in an accident at a construction site. She worked to support her sick aunt and send money home to her younger siblings. Her story should have been just another tragic immigrant tale. But when she spoke, her eyes shone with quiet strength instead of sorrow. Ethan found himself leaning forward, drawn to the warmth in her voice, the way she smiled even when she spoke of pain. "When can you start?" he asked finally. Her eyes widened a little. "You mean I have the job?" "Yes," he said, almost too quickly. "I could use someone who knows what loneliness looks like." Maria hesitated, as if weighing whether to say something more. "Loneliness isn't permanent, Mr. Hale," she said softly. "It's just a shadow that waits for light." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Something inside him stirred, something that had been silent for years. After she left the room, Ethan found himself standing by the window again, staring at the city below. But this time it didn't look quite so cold. He could buy everything: penthouses, art, power, even silence. But for the first time in years, he felt a small, dangerous spark of something he thought was gone forever. Hope. And it had walked into his life wearing a gray dress and eyes that saw right through his walls. The morning sun spilled across the glass walls of Ethan Hale's penthouse, turning the floor into rivers of gold. But he felt nothing, only the faint hum of the city far below, and the soft rhythm of footsteps as Maria moved through the rooms. She had been there a week. Yet somehow the silence no longer felt like a tomb. She moved quietly, humming under her breath as she dusted the bookshelves, her voice carrying a warmth that the steel and marble had never known. Ethan watched from his office doorway. She didn't notice him at first, her dark hair tied loosely back, a few strands falling over her face as she reached for a high shelf. There was something graceful about her movements, something that made even ordinary tasks look sacred. She turned, suddenly catching his gaze for a heartbeat. Neither of them moved. He saw a flicker of surprise, then a small, nervous smile. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said softly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," he replied too quickly, clearing his throat before adding, "I was just going to ask if you've settled in." She nodded. "Yes, sir. The place is very clean already, though it feels a little too quiet." Ethan let out a short breath. "Most people prefer quiet." She smiled. "Not always. Sometimes quiet makes the heart remember what it has lost." He didn't answer, but the words struck deeper than she knew. That night he found himself unable to sleep. The echo of her voice followed him through every darkened hallway. He went to the kitchen for water and stopped when he heard it again. Her voice soft, trembling like a prayer. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city, whispering in Spanish. Her hands clasped together. He could tell from her tone that it wasn't a song, it was a plea. He stepped closer. "Are you all right?" She turned quickly, wiping her eyes. "I'm fine, sir. I was just praying." "Praying for what?" "For courage," she said simply. "Sometimes the city makes me feel small." Ethan hesitated. Something in him wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how. Instead, he said, "Good night, Maria," and walked away, though the sound of her quiet voice stayed in his chest long after he closed his bedroom door. The next morning, a storm hit the city. Rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled through the sky. Ethan stayed home, canceling meetings. Maria moved through the house, lighting candles in case the power went out as the wind howled. She found him standing by the balcony door, staring at the storm. "You like the rain?" she asked quietly. "It reminds me that even the sky breaks sometimes," he said without looking at her. She stepped closer, her reflection joining his in the glass. "When things break, it doesn't always mean they're ruined," she said. "Sometimes it means they're about to begin again." Her words made him turn to face her. "Really? You believe that?" "I have to believe that," she said. "My husband died in the rain. I used to hate storms. Now I think maybe they wash away the pain so we can see the light again." For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside mirrored the one inside him. Thunder shaking the windows, lightning flashing across her face. She looked fragile but unafraid. Ethan felt something shift deep within him. He wanted to reach out, but before he could, the lights flickered, then went out, plunging the penthouse into darkness. Maria gasped softly. "It's all right," he said quickly, taking a step closer. "I'll check the generator," but she caught his arm. "Don't leave me alone, please." Her voice was barely a whisper. He could feel her trembling, the air between them charged with something that wasn't just fear. He hesitated. Ed then said, "Stay here, I'll be right back." But as he turned, the sound of shattering glass ripped through the darkness. They both froze. Ethan moved fast, pulling Maria behind him. Pieces of glass littered the floor near the window. One of the storm panels had given way, rain and wind tearing through the opening. Maria pressed close to him, her fingers gripping his sleeve, her breath quick against his neck. He covered her with his arm, shielding her from the flying shards, until the storm calmed and the maintenance team arrived. When it was finally over, she whispered, "Thank you." He looked down at her soaked hair, her trembling hands, and for the first time in years, his heart didn't feel frozen anymore. That night, as the city dried under a pale moon, Ethan sat alone thinking about her words. Sometimes things break, so they can begin again. He wasn't sure what was beginning, but he knew something had changed. He had lived in silence for so long, and now there was a voice he couldn't stop hearing, a heartbeat that wasn't his own, and it terrified him more than any storm ever could. The following week brought a strange stillness into Ethan's life. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the air every time Maria entered the room. He felt that same current that had filled the darkened penthouse that night. Something invisible had shifted between them. She was still quiet, still respectful, but there was a new softness in her eyes, a warmth that made him feel both alive and afraid. One evening, he returned home early from a meeting and found her in the kitchen. The scent of fresh bread and cinnamon filled the air. She was humming again, her voice calm, steady, the kind of sound that made even the walls seem to breathe. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching her for a long time before he finally said, "That smells better than anything I've eaten in months." She turned startled, her cheeks flushing pink. "I didn't hear you come in, Mr. Hale. I wanted to surprise you. You haven't been eating properly." He smiled faintly. "You're observant. I have to be," she said quietly when people forget to take care of themselves. Someone has to remind them. She placed a plate before him. Warm bread, honey butter, and tea. Simple things. Yet he couldn't remember the last time anyone had made something for him without wanting something in return. As he ate, Maria leaned against the counter and told him stories about her home, about her mother's garden, about the festivals that filled her village with color. Ethan listened, captivated by how alive her memories were. How love still lived in her, even after everything she had lost. When she spoke about her late husband, her voice didn't break. It softened as if grief had turned into gratitude. Then she looked at him and said, "Your house feels different now, less empty." He froze. Her eyes were kind, not judging, just honest. "It's because of you," he said, before he could stop himself. Her lips parted in surprise, but she didn't look away. Instead, she asked, "May I show you something?" He nodded, and she led him to the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly below a living sea of gold. She pointed to a distant rooftop. "Do you see that building? That's where I used to work. I cleaned offices there at night. When I first came to this country, every window I wiped looked into someone else's life. People laughing, eating together. It made me want to believe there was still warmth left in the world." He looked at her face illuminated by the soft glow of the city and realized she wasn't just talking about herself. She was offering him a chance to remember what warmth felt like. But before he could speak, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Dinner tomorrow at the Hale estate. Come alone. Urgent." Ethan's chest tightened. Whenever she demanded, he knew it meant trouble. The next night, he drove to his mother's mansion, the place where perfection was law and emotion was weakness. She sat waiting at the long dining table, her expression unreadable. "I saw the tabloids," she said calmly. "The photographs of you and that woman, the maid." "Ethan, her name is Maria," he said sharply. "She's an employee, nothing more." "Then why are you defending her?" "Because she's the only person in my life who treats me like a human being, not a brand." She leaned back in her chair, disgusted. "I warned you before, Ethan. People like her see men like you as opportunity, nothing more." He rose from his seat, anger simmering under the surface. "If you ever speak about her like that again, we're done." He left the mansion without looking back. The night air felt heavier than usual, filled with the weight of things unsaid. By the time he reached home, it was past midnight. The penthouse lights glowed softly through the rain-streaked windows. Maria was waiting in the living room, her face pale with worry. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I heard shouting earlier," the security guard said. "You left in a hurry." "I'm fine," he said, but his voice cracked. "No, you're not," she whispered, stepping closer. He wanted to push her away, to bury the ache under indifference, but when her hand brushed his sleeve, something inside him broke. The walls he had spent years building began to crumble. "You shouldn't care this much," he said. "I can't help it," she replied, "because you remind me of someone who forgot how to feel." He looked into her eyes, saw tears glimmering there, and something inside him shifted from restraint to surrender. He reached out, touched her face, and for the first time since the accident, he felt alive, truly alive. But just as the moment deepened, a sudden noise shattered the quiet, a faint metallic click near the door. Ethan turned sharply. Someone had been there. A shadow slipped out of sight into the corridor. He ran after it, but the elevator doors closed before he could reach them. Only the echo of the city remained, and Maria's frightened whisper behind him. "What's happening, Ethan? Who was that?" He stood frozen by the elevator doors, his pulse hammering. Someone had been watching them, someone who didn't want their world to heal. And as the night stretched on, he realized that his past, the one he thought he had buried, might not be finished with him after all. The following days crawled like shadows through Ethan's mind. He couldn't forget the sound of that faint metallic click near the elevator. It haunted him like a whisper in the dark. Security footage revealed nothing. No intruder, no movement, just a moment of static and a flicker of light, as if someone had tampered with the cameras. When he asked the building staff, they swore no one had been there, but Ethan knew what he felt. Someone had been watching him and Maria. He doubled the security system, added new locks, replaced passwords. Yet peace still wouldn't return. Every time he looked at Maria, he saw worry behind her calm eyes. She continued working with quiet grace, pretending not to notice his tension. But at night he could hear her pacing softly down the hall, unable to sleep, both of them trapped in the same invisible fear. One evening, a letter arrived, delivered by hand. No name, no return address. Inside was a single line written in elegant handwriting. "She doesn't belong in your world. Let her go before she ruins you." Ethan stared at it, his jaw tightening. It could have been from his mother, or maybe from one of his competitors, but the thought that someone had gotten close enough to leave the message chilled him. He burned the letter, but the warning stayed branded in his mind. Later that night, Maria came to his office, her hands clasped nervously. "I wanted to ask if you're angry with me. You've been distant." He looked up from his desk, meeting her worried eyes. "I'm not angry, Maria. I'm just trying to protect you from what? From me. From my life. It isn't safe anymore." She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "You think danger will stay away just because you build walls around yourself. Danger finds everyone, especially those who have something worth losing." Ethan's chest tightened. He couldn't look at her because she was right. That same week, he received a call from his mother's attorney. The Hale board was holding an emergency meeting. Investors were threatening to pull out. Rumors were spreading about Ethan's personal life, tabloids, hinting at scandal, manipulation, and fraud. None of it true, but the damage was already spreading faster than he could stop it. When he arrived at the boardroom, he found his mother waiting, pale but composed. "You've brought shame on this family," she said. "The company's reputation is collapsing because of that woman." Ethan's patience snapped. "If they're leaving because I'm in love, that says more about them than it does about me." He walked out before she could respond, driving straight home, heart pounding with fury. When he opened the penthouse door, Maria was waiting by the window, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like tears. "What happened?" she asked. "Everything," he said, his voice raw. "I'm losing everything again because of love." She moved closer, placing her hand on his chest. "You're not losing love. You're finding it for the first time." But he couldn't listen, not with the world collapsing around him. "You don't understand," he said. "This life, it's built on perception. When people see weakness, they destroy it. And you, Maria, you've become my greatest weakness." She stepped back, hurt filling her face. "Then maybe you need someone stronger." The silence that followed cut deeper than any words. She turned away, tears shining on her lashes. Ethan reached out but stopped, his pride chaining his hands. That night, she packed her few belongings quietly, leaving behind the faint scent of cinnamon and rain. By morning, she was gone, leaving only a note on the kitchen table. "Thank you for letting me believe in warmth again." The days that followed were hollow. He returned to a house that no longer felt like home. His empire crumbled. Headlines devoured his reputation. Investors fled, but none of it mattered. What hurt was the absence of her voice, the empty chair across the breakfast table, the sound of laughter that no longer echoed through his sterile walls. One evening, as he sat alone watching the city fade into dusk, the inn's Turcom buzzed a delivery. No name, again. Just a small brown package. Inside was a flash drive and a photograph. The picture showed Maria standing in a crowded market, smiling, unaware of the camera. The note beneath it read, "She's safer without you." But the flash drive contained something far darker: encrypted files, reports, photos of his company, documents, forged transactions that could destroy what little remained of his name. Someone was framing him, someone powerful enough to erase traces and rewrite reality. As he stared at the evidence, a cold realization struck him. Whoever had broken into his penthouse that night hadn't been after money or secrets. They'd been after Maria. She had become the easiest way to break him. Ethan stood at the window, rain beginning to fall against the glass. His reflection looked nothing like the man he once was. All his wealth, all his power, meant nothing without her. and now she was out there alone, hunted by the same darkness that had already stolen his peace. He whispered into the storm, "I will find you, Maria, no matter what it costs me, even if it costs me everything." And somewhere in the city beneath that same storm, a figure watched his tower from a parked car, phone pressed to his ear. He said softly into the receiver, "He's taking the bait, just like we planned. Now, watch him burn." Ethan hadn't slept for 3 nights. The storm outside had ended, but inside him it was only growing worse. The files on the flash drive revealed something impossible. Each forged transaction led to a shell company that never existed on paper, but the digital trail pointed directly to his name, his accounts, his signature. It was the same pattern that had destroyed other men before, powerful men who had suddenly fallen from grace. It wasn't random. Someone had designed this to ruin him completely. He sat in the dim light of his office, the city glowing faintly beyond the glass walls, when his phone buzzed. A private number. A distorted voice said, "We warned you to stay away from her. You didn't listen. Now it's too late." Ethan's grip tightened. "Who are you? What do you want?" The line went dead. The silence after that felt heavier than sound. He knew it wasn't just about his company anymore. This was personal. They wanted to break him through Maria. He went to the police with the evidence, but the officers exchanged quick glances and promised to investigate. He saw the doubt in their eyes, saw the way they treated him like another rich man crying wolf on his way out of the precinct. An old detective caught his arm, quietly saying, "You didn't hear this from me, but the people behind this play deep don't trust anyone with a badge." The detective's words echoed all the way back to the car. That night, Ethan made his choice. If the system wouldn't protect her, he would. He called a private investigator, the best in the city. The man's name was Vince Rourke, a grizzled veteran with a voice like gravel. Vince didn't waste time. After hearing Maria's name and seeing the photo from the flash drive, he frowned. "She's in danger," he said. "I've seen these people before. They don't just ruin reputations, they erase lives. If she's still in the city, we'll find her." Days turned into a blur of sleepless nights and dead ends, until finally one evening Vince called her name, came up on a list of workers registered at a shelter kitchen in Brooklyn. Ethan drove there himself the moment he saw her through the glass door. His heart stopped. She was serving soup to a line of strangers, her hair tied back, her smile soft and tired. She looked thinner, worn, but alive. He stepped inside quietly, afraid that if he spoke too soon, she might disappear. Maria looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in weeks, and in that instant, every wall inside him shattered. She set the ladle down slowly. "Ethan," she whispered. "I told you not to come, but I couldn't stay away," he said, his voice breaking. "You're not safe. Someone's using my name to hurt us." She shook her head. "I know." "Ow," she said. "Before you came here, 2 men were waiting outside asking questions about me. I hid in the storeroom until they left." The realization hit him like ice. They were already closing in. He reached for her hand. "Come with me now. We can't stay here any longer." She hesitated, torn between fear and trust, but when she saw the determination in his eyes, she nodded. They slipped out through the back door into the narrow alley, rain beginning to fall again, the city's hum mixing with the sound of their footsteps. As they reached the car, headlights flared from the corner of the street, a black SUV speeding toward them. Ethan pulled Maria behind a dumpster. The vehicle screeched to a stop. 2 men stepped out, dark suits, dark umbrellas scanning the alley. One of them spoke into a radio. "He's not alone. He's got the girl." The next seconds moved like slow motion. Ethan pushed Maria toward the car, shouting, "Get in! Don't look back!" He ducked as a bullet cracked the air above his head. Glass shattered. Alarms screamed. He slammed the car door and hit the accelerator tires, screaming as they tore down the wet street. Maria clutched her seat, trembling. Ethan's hands shook, but his eyes stayed fixed ahead. "We can't go home," he said through gritted teeth. "Whoever they are, they've been inside my system. They know every place we've ever been." "Then where do we go?" she whispered. "Anywhere. They can't find us." The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and rain as they crossed the bridge, heading toward the dark outline of the countryside behind them. The black SUV followed, relentless as a shadow. Maria turned her face toward him, her eyes wide with fear and love and something stronger than both. "Promise me," she said. "Promise me we'll make it through this." Ethan reached over his free hand, finding hers. "I promise," he said, "even if it costs me everything." But far behind them in the SUV, the man with the radio smiled coldly as he wowed. The GPS tracker blinking on his screen, the beacon hidden deep inside Ethan's car pulsed steady red, leading them straight to him. The rain didn't stop for hours. It chased them down back roads and highways until the city lights were nothing but a memory. Ethan's car tore through the darkness, heading north into the mountains. Maria sat beside him, clutching her small purse, her knuckles white with fear. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The silence between them carried everything. Words couldn't say. Finally, near dawn, Ethan pulled into an old service road that led to a forgotten cabin tucked in the trees. He had bought it years ago as a private retreat. No one knew about it except him, and now it was their only sanctuary. He turned off the headlights and sat for a moment, breathing hard, the sound of the rain against the roof, the only proof they were still alive. Maria looked at him, her eyes searching. "Are we safe here for now?" he said, but his voice held no certainty. She nodded, wiping the rain from her face. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "Who are these people? What do they want?" Ethan stared into the dark forest. "I built my company on security systems for governments and banks. I thought I was protecting people, but maybe someone used my technology for something darker. Maybe they want me silenced before I uncover it." He spent the morning checking the cabin for power and signal, but both were dead. No electricity, no reception. They were cut off from the world while Ethan worked to light the old fireplace. Maria boiled water on a small stove. She moved quietly, her presence steady, even in chaos. When he finally sat beside her, she offered him a cup of tea. "You need rest," she said. He shook his head. "Not yet." When night fell, the wind howled through the trees, and the sound of cracking branches made Maria flinch. Ethan noticed her fear and moved closer. "It's all right. No one knows we're here." She looked at him, her voice trembling. "What if they find us, Ethan? What if we can't outrun them forever?" "Then we fight," he said simply. But there was something else in his tone, a quiet certainty that came from love more than courage. Hours later, as they tried to sleep on the old couch, Ethan heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps outside the cabin. He sat up instantly. Heart pounding, he motioned to Maria to stay quiet. He grabbed the metal poker from the fireplace and crept toward the window. The darkness outside was thick, but a faint glimmer of light flickered between the trees. A flashlight moving slowly closer. Ethan's breath caught. Whoever it was, they had found them. He turned to whisper to Maria, but the back door creaked open before he could speak. The sound froze him. He stepped into the hallway, poker raised, but when the figure emerged, it wasn't a stranger. It was Vince Rourke, his private investigator, soaked from the rain. Ethan lowered the poker, his relief short-lived. "What are you doing here, Vince? I tracked the signal," he said. "We're not alone, Ethan." Maria stepped into the hall, fear flashing in her eyes. "What signal?" Ethan asked. Vince looked grim. "There's a tracker on your car. Someone's been following you since you left Brooklyn. I disabled it, but they're close." "How close?" Vince's voice dropped. "Minutes, maybe less. We need to move now." Ethan turned to Maria. "Grab what you can. We're leaving." They ran into the storm again, the woods alive with the sound of engines approaching, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Ethan pulled Maria through the trees, their feet sinking into the mud behind them. Men shouted orders, dogs barking, closing in. Vince fired 2 warning shots, buying them seconds of cover. "This way," he yelled toward the ravine. Ethan didn't hesitate. He took Maria's hand and jumped, sliding down the slope into the icy water below. The current was strong, dragging them through the blackness, but Ethan held her tight, refusing to let go. When they finally crawled out onto the far bank, they were shaking, cold and exhausted. The forest was silent again. Vince was gone. The gunfire had stopped. Maria looked at Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. "Did he make it?" Ethan didn't answer. He just pulled her into his arms, his chest heaving. "We keep moving," he said. "For him. For us." By dawn they reached an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of a small valley. Ethan checked the rooms, finding old furniture, dust, and quiet. He sank to his knees beside the window, watching the sun rise through broken glass. Maria sat beside him, her hand trembling in his. He finally spoke. Whoever is behind this isn't just after money, they're after everything. My company, my name, my life. And you, Maria said softly. What about me? Ethan looked at her, his voice raw. They'll use you to destroy me unless I find them first. She leaned her head against his shoulder, then whispered, then we find them together. He looked at her amazed. Even now, her courage burned brighter than his fear as the first light filled the room. Ethan made a silent vow. This time he wouldn't run, he wouldn't hide, he would uncover the truth behind the darkness chasing them. Outside, the valley was still and peaceful, but miles away in a sleek black car, a man watched a live feed of the farmhouse on a laptop screen. He smiled thinly and said into his earpiece, "Let them rest for now, they'll lead us straight to what we want. The real target has always been the woman." The morning light crept slowly through the cracked windows of the farmhouse. Ethan woke before Maria, his mind already racing. The night had been filled with broken sleep haunted by Vince's disappearance and the echo of gunfire in the forest. He sat by the window watching mist curl over the valley. The world outside looked calm, but he knew calm was a lie. Danger was closing in like a tightening noose. Maria stirred on the old couch, her hair tangled, her face pale from exhaustion. When she saw him, she tried to smile, but her voice trembled. "Did we lose them for now?" Ethan said. "But they'll come again. They always do." She nodded quietly, then asked, "What are we going to do? We can't keep running forever." Ethan turned. From the window, his eyes sharp with new resolve. "We stop running. We hunt them instead." He spent hours dismantling his laptop, connecting makeshift wires and old batteries, until he had a fragile link to one of his old secure servers. It took all morning, but finally a screen flickered to life. He typed fast, breaking through firewalls, searching for traces of his company's stolen data. Somewhere in those codes was the name of the person who wanted him erased while he worked. Maria sat beside him silent, offering him the comfort of her presence until suddenly her voice broke the quiet. "Ethan, look at this." She had found an old newspaper tucked in the farmhouse shelves. Its date was from 2 years ago. The headline read, "Senator Arthur Vale faces inquiry over defense contracts." Ethan froze. The name was familiar. Senator Vale had been one of his biggest clients, the man who had first convinced the government to buy his encryption software. Ethan whispered his name like a curse. "He was the only one with access deep enough to twist my systems against me." Maria's eyes widened. "Then he's behind this?" "Ethan, he's powerful enough to destroy anyone." Ethan nodded. "Yes, but I have proof, and proof can destroy him. If I can reach the main servers in the city, everything they forged can be reversed." Maria looked at him with fear in her eyes. "Then we'll go together." They left at dusk, taking back roads through the mountains. The journey was tense. Every car light made them flinch. Every sound of tires on gravel set their nerves on edge halfway down the mountain. Ethan stopped abruptly. The road ahead was blocked by a fallen tree, but the cut was too clean, too precise. Not an accident. He turned to Maria. "Get down." Before he could finish, a bullet shattered the windshield. They dove out of the car, rolling into the ditch. Gunfire erupted from the trees. Ethan pulled Maria behind a boulder, the air filled with the metallic scent of rain and gun smoke. "Stay here," he whispered, and crawled forward through the mud, spotting 3 silhouettes moving in the fog. He recognized one of them, the way he held his weapon steady, calm like a train.
Professional. Ethan's stomach turned. This wasn't random, these were hired killers. He grabbed a broken branch soaked in oil from the road's debris and lit it with a spark from his lighter, tossing it toward the car. It exploded into flame, lighting up the fog enough for him to see their faces. One of the men shouted orders and opened fire. Ethan fired back with Vince's old pistol, the gun shaking in his hand, but his aim true. One attacker fell, the others vanished into the mist. He ran back to Maria, her hands covering her ears. "Come on," he shouted. They ran into the forest, the sound of the burning car fading behind them. Hours later, when they finally stopped to catch their breath, they found a train track cutting through the woods. Ethan listened. No engines, no whistles, but the track led east, straight toward the city. They followed it until the first light of dawn painted the horizon, both covered in mud and bruises, exhausted but alive. Maria leaned against him, whispering, "Why us, Ethan? Why won't they stop?" "Because we found something we weren't supposed to," he said softly. By the time they reached the edge of the city, the streets were just waking to morning traffic. They blended into the crowd, renting a small room above an old diner. Ethan powered up a public computer, bypassing every security layer until he accessed the core server. What he found made his blood run cold. Senator Vale wasn't working alone. The file listed dozens of names, government officials, corporate leaders, and next to each name was a project code: Omega Genesis, a secret program using his software to spy on citizens and eliminate those who threatened exposure. Maria read over his shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. Ethan whispered, "They killed people to protect this. They framed me because I built the tool that made it possible." Maria looked at him and said, "Then you can destroy it." He turned to her, his voice trembling. "I can if I upload this file to the Global Transparency Network. It will expose all of them, but once I do, there's no going back. They'll come for us both." She met his gaze without fear. "Let them come," she said. "We've been running from darkness long enough. Maybe it's time we bring it into the light." Ethan stared at her, amazed by her courage, and realized he loved her more than his own life. As he prepared the final upload, a single message flashed on the screen: "Unknown user detected, connection traced." Maria's breath caught. "What does that mean?" Ethan's heart pounded. "It means they found us." Before he could react, the window shattered, gunfire tearing through the room. He grabbed Maria, pulling her to the floor, sparks flying from the shattered monitor as armed men stormed the hallway. Ethan whispered, "Hold on, we're not done yet. Not until the world knows the truth." The glass rained down around them, bullets slicing through the air. Maria screamed as Ethan dragged her behind. The overturned table splinters tore into his arm, but he didn't stop. His mind was already racing. The upload had begun. The progress bar on the shattered screen was still moving slowly, painfully. The truth was trying to reach the world, but they had less than a minute before the men outside broke in. Ethan tore the hard drive from the computer, clutching it in one hand while pulling Maria toward the back door. The hallway was filled with smoke and gunpowder, the sound of boots closing in from both sides. He pressed her against the wall, whispering, "Stay behind me no matter what." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving you, not now, not ever." A shadow moved at the end of the hall. Ethan fired once, then again. The figure fell, but two more took its place. He pulled Maria through the kitchen, bursting out into the alley, rain pouring down again as if the sky itself was trying to wash away the blood. The moment they stepped outside, a van screeched to a halt, blocking T. He exited. A tall man stepped out of the passenger seat, his gray suit soaked, his face calm, eyes like ice.
"Senator Arthur Vale," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "You finally showed yourself." Vale smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "You should have taken my offer. Ethan, we could have ruled the system together. Instead, you chose sentiment over power, and that woman." He nodded toward Maria. "She was your undoing." Ethan raised his gun. "Don't you dare speak her name." Vale tilted his head. "You built the weapon. We just learned how to aim it. Everything you had belongs to us now." Before Vale could signal his men, a gunshot cracked through the air. One of the guards dropped, clutching his chest. A car roared from the corner. Vince Rourke behind the wheel, alive, battered and bleeding, but still fighting. "Get in!" he shouted. Ethan shoved Maria into the back seat and jumped in after her. The van spun its tires, giving chase, the city lights flashing past in a blur. Bullets shattered windows, glass flying like snow. Vince gritted his teeth. "We're not going to outrun them. There's one place they can't follow," Ethan said, pulling out the hard drive. "The government data center under the East River. If I plug this in, it uploads directly to the transparency servers. They can't erase it once it's there." Vince nodded grimly. "Then we go out with a bang." The chase cut through traffic, horns, blaring tires, screaming, the rain turning the road into glass. They reached the tunnel entrance, but the van was right behind them, Vale's men firing through the windshield. Vince slammed the car sideways, blocking the tunnel door. "Run," he yelled as another bullet hit the glass. "Go now." Ethan grabbed Maria's hand and sprinted toward the underground stairs. The explosion hit seconds later, the heat throwing them to the ground. Vince's car gone in a burst of flame. Ethan dragged Maria through the smoke into the maintenance corridor, alarms echoing overhead. They reached a locked steel door at the end of the passage. Ethan punched the code. The door hissed open, revealing rows of servers humming like a living heart. He connected the hard drive to the nearest terminal. The progress bar lit up: 1%, 2%, 10%. Outside footsteps pounded closer. Vale's voice rang through the tunnel. "You can't stop it, Ethan. No one will believe your lies," Ethan shouted back. "I don't need them to believe me. I just need them to see the truth." The door burst open, armed men flooding in. Ethan pushed Maria behind the console, covering her with his body as the gunfire erupted. The servers sparked wires snapping, smoke filling the room. The upload hit 90%. Vale stepped through the smoke, raising his weapon. "You lose, Ethan." Ethan stared at him through the haze. "No, Senator, you do." He grabbed a loose cable from the floor and drove the exposed wire into the main control panel. Sparks exploded. The lights went out, and the servers roared like thunder. The overload surge shot through the system, igniting every circuit. The last thing Ethan heard before the blast was Maria calling his name. The shockwave knocked them both unconscious. When Maria awoke, everything was silent. The room burned in blue light from the flickering screens, smoke rising like ghosts. She crawled toward the console, the upload bar frozen at 99%. Then with a faint beep it hit. Complete. The truth had escaped into the world. Sirens wailed in the distance, rescue teams bursting through the tunnel hours later. Maria sat outside wrapped in a blanket, her hands shaking when they pulled Ethan from the wreckage. His pulse was weak but alive. He opened his eyes long enough to whisper, "Did it work?" She nodded, tears falling. "Yes, you did it. The truth is out." He smiled faintly, then slipped into unconsciousness. The next morning, every major news outlet in the world broadcast the story. Vale's empire collapsed, arrests spread across the government. The program called Omega Genesis was exposed for what it was: mass surveillance and silent elimination. The system Ethan had built to protect people had been turned into a weapon, but his sacrifice had destroyed it forever. Maria watched the sunrise over the city. She held his hand as machines beeped softly in the hospital room. "You saved them all," she whispered. "But I just wanted to save you." Ethan's fingers twitched, his lips moving faintly, his voice weak but certain. "You did, Maria. You saved me in every way that mattered." And somewhere in the chaos, as the world changed outside, a message blinked across the hospital monitor sender. "Unknown. The truth is only the beginning." 3 days passed before Ethan finally opened his eyes. The hospital room was quiet except for the faint hum of machines outside. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted his name. The world now called him the man who exposed the truth, but fame meant nothing to him. He looked for one thing only: Maria. She was there beside him, her head resting on his hand. She hadn't left his side once since the explosion. When she felt his fingers move, she lifted her head, tears filling her eyes. "You came back?" she whispered. "I told you I would." He said, his voice rough but steady. For a few moments, they simply looked at each other, the silence between them deeper than words. Then Maria said softly, "They called you a hero, Ethan." But he shook his head. "Heroes don't destroy the world they built. They just try to fix it before it's too late." News reports filled the screen on the wall. Senators arrested, corporations collapsing, and one man missing: Senator Vale. No trace found. Some said he died in the explosion. Others believed he escaped. Ethan knew better. Men like Vale didn't die easily. They hid, waited for the right moment to strike again, and somewhere deep down he could feel the storm wasn't over. When night fell, Maria dozed off in the chair beside his bed. Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The light above flickered once, twice, then went out. The room fell into darkness. His heart started to race. He heard footsteps outside. Soft, deliberate. Not the quick shuffle of nurses, but thus. A sound of boots moving with purpose. He reached for the call button. It didn't work. He reached for Maria, but before he could wake her, the door opened. A man stepped in, wearing a black coat, face shadowed by the dim emergency lights. In his hand was a small device flashing red. Ethan recognized it instantly. A silencer pistol. The man raised it and whispered, "The senator sends his regards." Ethan reacted before thinking. He pushed Maria off the chair as the bullet hit the bed, where she had been a second ago. The sound of shattering glass filled the air. Security alarms blared. The shooter fired again. Ethan grabbed the metal tray from the side table and threw it hard. It hit the man's arm. The gun dropped. Maria scrambled to the floor, pulling Ethan with her. They crawled toward the emergency exit as guards rushed down the corridor. The assassin vanished into the smoke. By the time the police arrived, he was gone, leaving only a shell casing and a note taped to the wall. "You exposed us, but you can't erase us." They moved Ethan to a private recovery house under protection, but safety was an illusion. The news channels now questioned everything: who funded the attack, What secrets had still been buried? The public wanted blood justice and the face of the man who started it all. Ethan. He became the target of both admiration and fear. Maria saw the toll it took on him every day. He stared out the window, lost in thought, as if waiting for something he couldn't name. Then one evening, as rain fell softly outside, Maria came to him holding a small test strip in her trembling hands. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." He turned and froze. The look on her face said it before she spoke. "I'm pregnant." Ethan blinked for a moment, unable to breathe. The world seemed to stop. He reached for her hand but pulled back, afraid to hope. "That's not possible," he whispered. "The doctors, they said I couldn't." She smiled through her tears. "I know, but it's true."
He felt dizzy, the memories of that hospital bed, the years of emptiness, the words of doctors echoing in his mind, impossible, permanent, final. But here she stood, shaking, crying, smiling, all at once, saying the one thing that could break him open completely. The impossible had happened. She cupped his face in her hands. "Ethan, this isn't science, this is grace." For the first time in years he laughed, not the cold, polite sound people used in boardrooms, but a real laugh, raw and unrestrained. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching. "Thank you," he whispered, not to her, not even to himself, but to something greater, something unseen. Outside the rain stopped and the clouds broke, just enough for moonlight to spill across the floor, but far away in a dark office lit by a single screen a familiar voice spoke. Senator Vale, his face half hidden by the glow of the monitor, his eyes sharp with vengeance. He turned to the man beside him. "The message failed. The upload went through, but we're not finished with him." The man nodded. "What about the woman?" Vale smiled, cold and deliberate. "She's the key now." Back in the quiet room, Maria felt a sudden chill, a strange unease. She didn't know why, but she held Ethan's hand tighter, as if some invisible shadow had just crossed the threshold. The miracle had come, but so had the warning. Their love had survived fire, bullets, and betrayal, but the battle for their future was only beginning. The months that followed were a strange mix of peace and fear. Maria's pregnancy changed everything, their small world filled with hope again, yet danger lingered like a shadow behind every sunrise. Ethan spent his days strengthening security systems around their safe house and his nights dreaming of a life free from running. He'd lost his company, his reputation, and nearly his life, but the idea of becoming a father gave him something he had not felt in years: purpose. Maria grew quieter as her Odie changed. The nights were filled with restless dreams of faceless men and whispers in dark rooms. Ethan held her close each time, promising no one would ever hurt her again, but he knew promises meant little against men like Senator Vale. Then one evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ethan received an encrypted message on his rebuilt laptop. No sender, no trace, just 4 words: "She is not safe." His blood turned to ice. He looked at Maria sleeping peacefully on the couch, her hand resting on her belly. He locked the message away deep inside his encrypted drive, but the words wouldn't stop echoing through his mind. "She is not safe." 2 weeks later they moved into a hidden apartment on the outskirts of the city, guarded by 2 of Ethan's former security officers. Maria's belly had grown round and full, her laughter lighter than he had ever heard it. One afternoon she pressed his hand against her stomach, smiling. "Feel that, Ethan? The twins are fighting again." "Twins?" Ethan froze. "Twins," she nodded, tears glimmering. "It's 2, Ethan, 2 hearts." He fell to his knees, overwhelmed, emotion breaking through the walls he had built all his life. This was more than a miracle, this was proof that love had rewritten his fate. But peace never lasts long for those who carry truth. Late one night Ethan was working in his small office when the lights flickered again, the same way they had in the hospital. His computer screen came alive on its own, a video feed opened. Senator Vale appeared, smiling, that cold smile. "Hello, Mr. Hale, I heard congratulations are in order. Twins? Remarkable, really. The human body can do such miraculous things when properly motivated." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "What do you want?" "I want what's mine," Vale said calmly. "Your technology, the Omega codes. You think you destroyed them, but I kept a copy. Give me access to your new encryption, or I'll make sure your little miracle never sees daylight." Ethan's heart pounded. "You won't touch her," Vale chuckled. "I don't have to. She's already been touched by my creation."
The screen went black. Ethan ran to the bedroom. Maria sat up, startled. "Ethan, what's wrong?" "Nothing," he said, forcing calm. "We're leaving right now." Minutes later they were speeding through the dark streets, heading for the safe house where his old friend Agent Reese waited. Reese was a former federal investigator, now leading a quiet life under a new name. He was the only man Ethan still trusted when they arrived. Reese listened silently to Ethan's story, then leaned forward. "Vale's been funding genetic programs for years. It's possible Maria's pregnancy was targeted, maybe even manipulated." The thought made Ethan's blood run cold. "No," he said. "She's healthy. This is real." Reese hesitated. I believe that. But if he's telling the truth and he still has access to the Omega network, he can track you anywhere you go. Suddenly a low hum filled the air. The lights dimmed again. Reese's expression changed. Get down before he finished. The windows shattered. An explosion rocked the building. Smoke and fire filled the room. Ethan grabbed Maria, pulling her to the floor, covering her with his body. When the ringing in his ears stopped, he heard faint cries. The building was collapsing. He pushed through debris, carrying Maria in his arms until they stumbled into the rain-soaked street. Maria coughed blood on her lips. Ethan, my babies. He looked down, panic rising. Stay with me, Maria, please stay with me. Sirens wailed in the distance, but all he could hear was her fading heartbeat. She whispered something, but the words were lost in the storm. Hours later, Ethan woke in a hospital bed, his body wrapped in bandages. He tore the tubes from his arms, shouting for Maria. The nurse froze, then whispered, "She's alive, but in critical condition, and the babies they're fighting to survive." Ethan's world tilted. He struggled to stand until Reese appeared, holding his shoulder steady. "Ethan, you saved them all. 3 are alive for now." He stumbled. To the neonatal unit, glass walls glowing softly with the heartbeat of machines inside. 2 tiny infants lay surrounded by wires, their chests rising and falling together. He pressed his forehead to the glass. Tears falling silently behind him, Reese said quietly, "Vale is dead." Explosion caught him in his own trap. Ethan stared at his children and whispered, "No evil survives forever." 2 weeks later, Maria woke weak but alive. Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand. She looked toward the incubator where their twins now slept, strong and breathing on their own. "Are they real?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Yes, they're real. 2 boys perfect and stubborn like their mother." She laughed weakly. "Like our love." Then her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I'd lose them. I thought I'd lose you." "You never will," he said. "The darkness is gone forever." Months passed. The headlines changed the world, moved on. Ethan rebuilt quietly. This time, not an empire of code, but a foundation, named after the twins, the Hale Trust, for children born into chaos. He gave away his fortune piece by piece until all that remained was peace. One evening, as the sun set over their small home, Maria rocked the twins in her arms. Ethan watched from the doorway, remembering every battle, every wound, every sacrifice that had brought them here. One of the babies opened his tiny fist, gripping Maria's finger tightly. She smiled at Ethan. "Come here, meet your sons." Ethan knelt beside her, tears filling his eyes. "This," he said, "this is everything I ever wanted." She kissed his forehead. "This was never about what we lost, Ethan. It was always about what we were meant to find." Outside the world carried on full of noise and greed and ambition. But in that small house, there was only silence, peace, and the laughter of 2 children who had defeated fate. The millionaire who once thought he had everything now understood what true wealth meant. Not power, not money, but love born. Out of pain, faith rising from ruin and life that refused to surrender to darkness. Ethan Hale finally had what no empire could buy, a family and a future. As night settled, he whispered to Maria, "We survived the fire, the bullets, the lies, and somehow love still won." She smiled against his chest. "Love always wins, Ethan. It just takes the right heart to believe it."